How you doing today, folks? Today I want to share a little secret with you. I have not used a shovel or an edging tool to edge my gardens for at least 5 years. I found a way to do it that's quicker, looks better, and is less work than using a shovel or an edging tool. And what I want to do today is to try to show you how I go about doing that. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be using a weed whacker to edge our gardens. And if you're going to use your weed whacker to edge the gardens, you do need to start with one nice, deep, clean edging. But once you get that garden edged out just the way it should be, you can use the weed whacker to follow up every month, 2 weeks, month, run it along the edge of the garden, and you're going to keep those edges nice and crisp. And it's going to look better than if you just use a shovel to edge it once a year. You're not going to have to rake up a whole bunch of junk, less work. You're not going to have to get rid of a whole bunch of junk, less debris, and it just goes, I don't know, 10 times faster. So I think it's something you should definitely consider if you've got a large yard. Or the other advantage of using the weed whacker is, you know, when you edge with a shovel or an edging tool, you cut back an inch or two every year. If you use the weed whacker, you can hold that line right where it is because you don't have to keep cutting back. After you cut the line with the weed whacker, the grass is going to grow in, and when you cut it next time, you just cut it right where it was before. So I really think that edging with a weed whacker is a viable option, and I think it's something that you want to try. However, edging with the weed whacker is going to be a little bit more dangerous than using the edging tool or the hand shovel. Remember, folks, we're dealing with a weed whacker, so the edge of the weed whacker, we've got this spinning piece of string. So if you've got very coarse mulch, if you've got gravel, if you've got just a random rock, it's going to send them shooting away from the weed whacker. So you really need to be careful if there's any windows, like within 20, 30 feet of where you're working. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll put a wheelbarrow up just to block the debris coming off, and even that's not enough. If there's a car, I don't care if it's a fancy European car or if it's a beat up old Honda, you can't have all this junk shooting into the cars. So you really have to plan ahead when you're doing this type of work. The other thing is you don't want to have any children or pets around because they're not going to know not to look when all this debris is coming off. As far as your own safety goes, I always wear a pair of goggles. If you're new at this, I would recommend a face shield and a pair of goggles. You are going to get hit in the face no matter how careful you are. You're going to get hit by some rocks, or if you're weed whacking in pine bark mulch or gravel, I probably wouldn't even do pine bark mulch or gravel because that stuff just turns into projectiles. But the coarser the mulch, the more it's going to come airborne, which is another reason why the mulch I've started using is shavings when I'm cutting wood, and it's very fine so it doesn't get shot around. The mulch I use in pretty much all of my gardens is double shredded hemlock. It's a very fine mulch, so it tends not to get shot around as much. So we talked about being careful, protecting your eyes, protecting your face. We talked about keeping children away. We talked about keeping pets away. We talked about being careful of windows, being careful of cars. And now I just want to talk a little bit about the weed whacker that I use to edge my gardens. And what I use is an Echo 266 HT. I'm pretty sure this is what's considered a commercial trimmer. For the cost of a trimmer, even if you're a homeowner, I mean, this trimmer is going to last you like 15 years, maybe longer, as long as you use it once in a while, don't let the gas go bad, don't do anything stupid with it. So, you really want a commercial duty, straight shaft trimmer, and your line, I use .095 line. When I was younger, I used some residential models of trimmers, and that really fine line, it just breaks too quickly. It doesn't stand up when you try to cut a thick weed. What you're gonna do is once you get your safety equipment on, start your weed whacker, is you're gonna hold your weed whacker upside down, and I think I already said you really want a straight shaft weed whacker for this. And I tend to kind of use my forearm to kind of balance the weight of the weed whacker, and then I'll usually just grab it here and I'll stand kind of like this, and I'll just walk backwards slowly to cut my edge. Now it's going to take time to get good at it, so you'll start out going slower and then you'll get better. But you just line her up like this. I like to hold it so the weed whacker is as far away from me as possible, so I get hit by as little stuff as possible, but it's going to happen. I'm sorry. There's no way around it. If you don't want to get hit by stuff, don't do it this way. And you'll just work your way down. And I try to almost hold the weed whacker farther back. Now my weed whacker spins counterclockwise, so if I'm weed whacking like this, all the debris is going back that way. And you just move your way along. Now what I usually end up doing is at this stage in the game, I'll probably do it twice. If the garden hasn't been edged for a while with the weed whacker, what I'll do is I'll run my edge once kind of quickly, or I'll run my edge once just to get a rough idea where it is, and I won't sweat it too much. And I'll come back a second time and slow down and try to get those nice flowing curves. Now when you're going through and edging the first time, what I'll also do is if I see some weeds like within a foot of the edge, I won't even change my weed whacker. I'll just kind of move the weed whacker over a little bit and zip those weeds out. Especially, the grass. The grass has rhizomes, which are stems that spread into the beds. So if you can get in there, sometimes I'll just kind of stop on the piece of grass and just move my weed whacker back and forth a little bit to kind of create a little trench there and cut the roots. Sometimes I'll just hold it in one spot. But if you see weeds near the edge of the bed, don't be afraid to use your weed whacker to whack them. When I go back and do the final cleanup, I try to do that all in one smooth motion so I get a smooth line. And then the other thing I do, and I have a 1 acre property here. You can see I've got a lot of mulch. If you've got a lot of mulch and you see an annual weed, don't be afraid to take your weed whacker while you're doing this and just zip your annual weeds down. Now again, if it's a very chunky mulch or gravel, it's going to kick up. So I wouldn't recommend it for like pine bark nuggets or gravel. But with what I've got and with hemlock mulch, I'm not afraid to just, as I'm doing this, I'll kind of go through and zip some of the weeds on the edge of the bed. Let's move the camera. I got to be careful where I put the camera because I don't want to hit the camera and break it. But we'll see if we can put the camera somewhere and I'll show you what it looks like when I do this. It's no accident that this fence has about a foot of mulch on either side, because it's so much easier to run the weed whacker down that line than it is to try to weed whack all the grass growing underneath that fence. So all I need to do is once or twice a month, run that weed whacker down the line, keep it looking really nice. Let me show you. Looks a little bit nicer, right? Nice and clean, looks maintained. We're walking along the garden and this is the part that I hadn't done. And then after this drain pipe is the part I did. And I think you can see the difference of how nice that edge looks. Now any grass you see on the inside of the bed, in a day or so it'll just brown out and be gone. But if for some reason, you know, when I'm maintaining gardens, if the mulch is very thin on the edge of the bed, just take a leaf rake and just kind of squish the mulch in the bed around. You can rake a touch more towards the edge if you feel a need to. But otherwise, you know, this is all going to just look fine in a day. I mean, it looks pretty darn good now. It'll look less trimmed in a day or so. But this edge, you know, I used to do this like every year. I'd come out with the edger tool and I'd re-edge it. And about 3-4 years ago, I was just like, this is silly. So I just take the weed whacker out and I just run it along that, you know, maybe every 2 mowings, maybe every 3 mowings. I'll admit I'm not perfect. There have been times I've had this whole garden just covered with weeds. I'll run the weed whacker along the edge to define the bed, and then I'll go back and put the weed whacker flat and just, you know, usually it's chickweed in the spring, which is pretty easy to kill, and just weed whack the bejesus out of it. Take a rake it up, and then put a little bit of mulch on top. So that was just an introduction, folks, and that's just to give you kind of a general idea of how to do it. It's gonna take some time to learn the technique, to get the control over the weed whacker. Again, you know, you're gonna get hit in the face with rocks, with mulch. If you don't want that risk, you don't need to do this. But I found for my yard and for gardens I maintain, if I come by and do this, my yard, I try to do this every 2 or 3 mowings. Yards I maintain, usually like every 4 to 6 weeks I'll come by and I'll run the weed whacker along the edge of the bed, and it just makes a huge difference to have that nice crisp definition. That's gonna do it for today, folks. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you soon. Take care.